Hi, I'm Jan Green and this is Crash Course U.S. History. Today we're going to be talking about the Progressive Era and the Gilded Age. What is the Progressive Era and the Gilded Age, you ask? Well, it's a time of social and political reform in which political bosses ruled the land and corrupted the government. However, on the other side of the spectrum, women and minority groups had pretty much no rights at all. One political boss, William Boss Tweed, stole over $200 million from you. The spoils system was one of the biggest government corruptions of the time. It was the practice of rewarding government supporters with political jobs. In other words, it was unfairness all the way around. Several acts were created in response to the spoils system, such as the Pendleton Civil Service Act, the Interstate Commerce Act, and the Sherman Antitrust Act. However, the Sherman Antitrust Act kind of backfired on whole meaning. It ended up giving more power to big political bosses and less power to unions like it was supposed to. The Wisconsin idea was another big move in the Progressive Era. Wisconsin was one of the first states to put in progressive reforms, such as cleansing the country of political bosses. People were also demanding power in electing officials. Now it's time for the mystery document. The rules are simple. Either I get it right, and I get a Twizzler to eat, or I get it wrong, and I get slapped with the Twizzler. The mystery document reads, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. I think it's the 16th Amendment. Ow! I thought it was right. Oh yeah, you are right here. This amendment was one of the first starting the power to the people slogan. The 17th Amendment, also ratified in 1913, required the direct election of senators, meaning that the voters would play a big role in choosing the candidates. The government was not the only part of America in the progressive movement. Many journalists, called muckrakers, who would rake muck, would also dig up dirt on dirty politicians. Progressive presidents played a big role in ruling the country. President Theodore Roosevelt was one of the first progressive presidents. President Theodore Roosevelt, or TR for short, wanted to serve the public since he was a child. His path started when he was elected into the New York legislature, and eventually became the vice president under President McKinley. After McKinley was shot by an anarchist, TR took office. He quickly became a trust buster, or someone who broke up trust between big businesses. When TR ran for president in 1904, in his own right, he promised the public a square deal. This means that the people from farmers to tycoons would have the same opportunity to succeed. Now it's time for the America moment. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "It is an incalculable added pleasure to anyone's sum of happiness if he or she grows to know, even slightly and imperfectly, how to read and enjoy the wonder book of nature." He also tried to protect the environment, making the U.S. Forest Service. Succeeding Teddy Roosevelt was President William Taft. Taft was also a progressive president and broke up more bad trust than Teddy had. In the election of 1912, Teddy Roosevelt wanted to run again, and so did Taft. As a result, TR made up his own party, the Bull Moose Party. The Republicans chose Taft as their candidate, but the Democratic candidate, Woodrow Wilson, won. Wilson wanted to restore free competition, so he set up the New Freedom. Even though Woodrow Wilson was elected as a Democrat, he was also progressive. And even though the progressives supported many worthy causes, they didn't support women's suffrage, which is a woman's right to vote. But in 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention marked the start of women's rights movements. At the Seneca Falls Convention, women started to speak about how they did not have the right to vote and they did not have the same opportunities as men. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony formed the National Women's Suffrage Association, or NWSA for short, after the Civil War had ended. This group pushed for an amendment or law to pass that gave women the right. Finally, their wish was granted in 1919 when the 19th Amendment was passed that gave women the right to vote. This occurred after Alice Paul, a women's suffragist, spoke with Woodrow Wilson in 1913 about how so many women had committed themselves to achieving this reform. After this amendment was ratified, so many new opportunities were opening up for women. Many women became lawyers or went to medical school to get a PhD. Unfortunately, today women still fight for equal jobs and pay as men, considering that every dollar that a man makes, a woman makes 7. Women also joined clubs, where they raised money and pushed for other reforms. One of the reforms they also pushed for was prohibition, which is the ban on the sale and consumption of alcohol. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, or the WCTU, was created, with Frances Willard as their president, to stop alcohol abuse. After years of effort, the 18th Amendment was passed in 1917 and ratified in 1919. While women pushed for reforms to suit their causes, so did African Americans and other minority neighborhoods. Reformers such as Booker T. Washington helped gain equal rights for women and minority groups. He was an educator, and he emerged as the most prominent African American. His approach on gaining equal rights was to have African Americans learn trades and seek to move up gradually in society. Eventually, they would have money and power to demand equality. Another reformer, W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a brilliant scholar, was the first African American to receive a PhD from Harvard University. Du Bois urged blacks to fight discrimination rather than patiently submit to it. During which time, a group named the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP for short, was formed in 1909. Ida B. Wells was an African American journalist who wrote to protest lynchings in the community in her newspaper, Free Speech Wells. She called for a boycott of segregated streetcars and white-owned stores. President Wilson ordered the segregation of workers in the federal civil service. He told protesters who came to talk to him, segregation is not humiliating, but a benefit. Some African Americans succeeded despite the struggles or obstacles that Wilson put up for them. As the years passed, Mexican immigrants immigrated to the United States. As they started to come after the year of 1910, due to the revolution and famine that swept Mexico, the immigrants came from all levels of Mexican society. Many were poor farmers, but some came from middle-class and upper-class families. 90% of the Mexican immigrants settled in the Southwest, such as New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. Since many of the immigrants could not find work in the Southwest, they started to move toward the Midwest and Rocky Mountain region. Mexican immigrants worked in the fields as field hands, built roads, or dug irrigation ditches. Others worked in city factories under harsh conditions. Anglo workers were paid more than Mexican immigrants. Like most immigrants, Mexican immigrants wanted to preserve their culture and language. To accomplish this, they created barrios, which were ethnic Mexican neighborhoods. Within the barrio, Mexican immigrants helped each other form mutualistas, or mutual aid groups. Members of the mutualistas collected money to pay for insurance and legal advice. They also collected money for the sick and the needy. Many Japanese immigrants worked as farmers on dry, barren land that Americans thought were useless. The Japanese immigrants made their farmland profitable, and they were producing a large percentage of Southern California's fruits and vegetables. There was a lot of prejudice against Asians. Because of this, Roosevelt made a gentleman's agreement in 1907 with Japan. The agreement was to stop any more workers from coming to the United States. In exchange, the United States would allow Japanese women to join their husbands who were already in the country. A lot of religious minorities also faced prejudice. The Anti-Catholic American Protective Association was a nativist group, which worked to restrict immigration. Catholic children faced a lot of prejudice in school. Some teachers lectured against the Pope and spoke ill about Catholicism. In response to this, American Catholics set up their own parochial schools, which were schools sponsored by a church. There was a lot of anti-Semitism or prejudice against Jews in 1913 in Georgia. In response to the lynching and anti-Semitism against Jews, American Jews founded the Anti-Defamation League, worked to promote understanding and fight prejudice against Jews. Such groups as the NAACP and the Anti-Defamation League were formed to fight discrimination. Today, many minority groups still work against prejudice. In conclusion, the Progressive Era and Gilded Age was an impressive time of social and political reform in the United States. Well, this has been Joan Green on Crash Course U.S. History. I'll see you next time.